Welcome to Get the Facts, the program that provides you with information on government's policies and initiatives. I'm your host, Enthros Campbell. Now, today we'll be talking with consultant psychiatrist Dr. Jeffrey Walcott on how to cope with the loss of a loved one, especially at this time of the year. Dr. Walcott, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
First, explain the impact of the death of a loved one.
Well, you see, most persons experience loss differently,
Yes.
but there are commonalities. But I think one of the most important things for us to recognize is that dealing with grief is a normal human experience. It's something that we have to go through. It's inevitable, and it's not a pathology. In saying that, however, we recognize that it is painful and can be immensely painful for persons who are experiencing, depending on how close they are to the person that they have lost. And so there's been a sort of framework that has been developed to identify the emotional states that persons go through. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had developed a pattern of grief that we see. And initially what you see early in the loss is the business of denial. Persons end up in shock because you can't process it at the immediate impact of the event. And then persons go through feelings of anger, you go through stages of bargaining, and then eventually you then start to have the feelings of depression and finally acceptance. And those steps are not clear or linear. In other words, people can go through various stages at various times, and there's no time limit. So each person is different, but what you require during those stages remains somewhat similar. People need information, they need connection, they need support, emotional support, and at the end, they need guidance and some amount of direction as to how to get their lives to move on while incorporating the loss that they've gone through.
Yes. What kind of information you're talking about
When you
here?
talk about persons having to deal with the shock, it's important for you to engage with them and to actually help them to process the events of what's been happening. You think of a sudden loss, for example, COVID-19, immediately persons start to question what's happened in the hospital, what happened with the person, what's going on. And it's important for you, even though the questions may seem difficult or intrusive, it's important to take the time and follow through and answer the questions of the persons that are grieving, because it allows them to move beyond the stage of shock and denial that they're going through. And we have to spend time talking to people. I think that's the most critical thing.
That's important, yes. So would the impact be different depending on the age of the person?
It does, and depending on the experience. Persons who have dealt with loss before tend to be more resilient. Resiliency is a trait, not a character trait, but it's a learned process that we develop over time. The more difficulties we go through, the more adversities, the stronger we are at dealing with future events. And so persons will vary based on experience, based on age, based on stage of development and psychological strengths. So it tends to be different with each person, but some of the commonalities are they all need support. They all need a shoulder or a listening ear, and we all need a supportive community around us when we go through these.
So it's not true that children would deal with it better than probably an older person, not a middle-aged person, but a much older person.
Not necessarily. I mean, the issue with children is that their processing of it might be different because they may not understand or be able to conceptualize the issues as they are for an adult. But it still has lasting effects, and in some cases the effects that you see in children could be far worse because it can then manifest itself in the later years. And so it's important for us, while we recognize it, to not exclude or to dismiss the experience that anyone is going through when it comes to dealing with pain and suffering.
Right. Talk to us about some of what we should look out for, the signs that we would see and the kind of behavior in persons who are going through this kind of grief.
I think one of the important hallmarks or triggers for the intervention process is withdrawal. Persons who are going through any form of psychological pain or suffering will have a normal tendency to withdraw, and that's the wrong and counterproductive thing to do, because at this stage is when you actually need to have the support of persons around you, not necessarily to discuss what's happened, but just to be there, just to be in a safe space with persons that are supportive, that are sharing in the grief.
Okay, so what other signs can we look with? So there's withdrawal. Are there any kind of other signs?
And I think what a delineation is to identify when clinical or significant impairment has occurred where we'll need professional help. And I think that's where you alluded to. But the issue is, once you have changes in your sleep patterns, your appetite, physiological changes. In other words, you're being impaired now, first physically, and then psychologically, not able to perform at work, not able to do your normal daily routine. And then that may be a need for some level of professional intervention. But it's important to understand, because most people view psychiatric care or psychological care as an intrusion or as somewhat of a forced entity, but it's really not. We're here to help and to provide support as much as you need.
At what point should two persons actually go get help, professional help?
Well, there's a short answer to that, and the short answer is, if they feel the need or if the family has a concern, you should seek help, because if it's not needed, we will just guide you along that process. But if it is needed, it's better to err on the side of caution.
How long, though, should a person be grieving for?
There is absolutely no way of telling that. But in essence, the process should not be impacting your functionality for greater than probably a 2 or 3 week period. And if it continues to impact your functionality beyond that point, you will need assistance to maneuver the channels of grieving that you're going through and to actually help you. So one of the interesting things about our country as it stands now, most, if not all, the public health facilities have mental health services attached to them in the nearest community clinic that you can have. And there's a plethora of both private and public entities that provide psychiatric and psychological services. And the Ministry of Health actually has several helplines that they have created to be able to direct persons to access psychotherapeutic or supportive psychotherapeutic services and mental health services all across the island. So all you need to do is to reach out to one of your health facilities or even your private practitioner, and they can guide you to accessing mental health care, both in the public and private sector.